Hey, you guys. Time once again for another movie retrospective. And again, just like last week, having to do this by myself just because the day that it was supposed to be recorded, like Tom unexpectedly had to go do something else. So I said, well, you just go ahead because I got to get this kicked out. I got to get it edited. I got to get it put up. So I'll just talk about this by myself and it'll completely be fine. So the movie that we're talking about this week is a fucking classic, going all the way back to the 1950s and talking about some fucking Vincent Price goodness. This is House of Wax. Now, I had seen this movie a very long time ago. I'll talk a little bit about, I don't know if I necessarily want to talk too much about the 2005 remake, which was okay, but I felt like, you know, it had some good gore and stuff like that. But it wasn't really a remake of House of Wax. It almost kind of seemed more like a remake of sort of House of Wax, sort of Waxworks, sort of Tourist Trap. I kind of felt like it was more like a slasher movie, but it was like a pretty decent flick, but it's not really the same story. Now, the 1953 Vincent Price House of Wax, I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, is itself a remake. It was actually a remake of a 1933 film called Mystery of the Wax Museum, which was like a thriller. And interestingly, other than a couple different things, plot like a couple characters that were taken out, it's very, very similar to that earlier film. Like, the plot is very, very similar. Even some of the gags are repeated. If you've seen the 1953 House of Wax, there's a gag in there with, like, two of the morgue attendants, and they go in there and one of the bodies, like, sits up. Yeah, it's like the bodies sit up. Sometimes it's the gases or whatever it is, like the preparation. So that's gag is even in the original movie. As I said, there's a couple changes. The 1933 one was actually pre-Hays Code. So they actually got away with a couple of things in there that they wouldn't have got away with in the 50s one. For example, one of the guys, like one of the proprietor of the wax museum, like the villain, one of his henchmen is a criminal, and like the cops bring him in, and in the original movie they actually get him to talk by, like, he's a heroin addict and he's a junkie and he's like jonesing, so they're like, hey, we'll give you some heroin if you like tell us what we want to know, and like dangling in front of him. So they couldn't do that in the 50s one because of the Hays Code, so they actually made him an alcoholic, but the scene is otherwise the same. Which I thought was very interesting. Hays Code, pre-Hays Code, and Hays Code is very, very interesting to me. So House of Wax, the 1953 one. Vincent Price had been in several movies prior to this, obviously. I believe he started his acting career in the late 1930s, I want to say. Although normally, like before that, I kind of felt like he'd played more kind of like sympathetic characters, more leading men, but, like good guys, you know what I'm saying? This movie was sort of the first one that he was in where he ended up playing a villain, and it made such a big impact that this essentially scripted pretty much the rest of his career of him playing, these kind of like mad scientist characters, playing villainous type of characters, the Edgar Allan Poe movies that would come out later on, the Roger Corman ones. This was kind of ground zero for that, I guess, if you want to call it that. This is the first movie where he actually played a straight up villain and obviously made a really big impact, and that's kind of like the jobs he got going forward. Now, this was directed by André de Toth, who is a Hungarian filmmaker and had made a lot of movies in Hungary. I believe he made a couple more movies for major studios later on, one of which was like Crime Wave. He made kind of a lot of noir and like crime kind of movies, gangster type stuff later on. And also, I think in the late 70s, I think he was even like a second unit director on like Superman, the Richard Donner one, and stuff like that. So he had a very, very long career. This was also, interestingly, the first color 3D movie put out by a major American studio, which was Columbia Pictures. It wasn't the first 3D movie because I think they had released a 3D black and white one, not either the same year or the year before. And there had actually been an independent color 3D movie. I think it was called Buana 3D or something. And it was like this massive, massive hit, which is what gave Columbia the idea to put this one in 3D. Did this need to be in 3D? Probably not. But honestly, I didn't get to see it because I watched this on Shudder. You can watch it on Shudder. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. If you have Amazon Prime, I believe you can watch it on there for free. But it's on Shudder as well. Shudder also has the 2005 House of Wax. So if you want to like compare the two, they're very, very different. But you know, if that's kind of what you're into, you can totally do that. But there is actually, I'm pretty sure it's available in the US, but there is a Blu-ray that actually has the 1953 House of Wax, the 1933 Mystery of the Wax Museum, and it also has the 3D version. You can watch the 3D version of the 1953 like on your home TV, I guess if you're like set up for that. Now, I watched a review. One of my favorite horror channels is Grumpy Andrew. He actually had the 3D one, and he said that watching it in 3D at home was like an amazing experience. As I said, there are a couple of gags in this that you know that they put in just for the 3D, like coming at you type stuff. But he's like, it's not even that. It's like just the depth of field of like the set dressing, like the set design, like the wax museum. It's like, it just looks really, really awesome. And he was talking about there's like a chase scene where, you know, the villain is chasing this woman through these creepy streets that looks like London, but I guess it's supposed to be New York. And he's like, and it just looks so cool. Like the depth of field like looks really great. So he's like, the 3D back then, at least in this context, looked even better than like some of the 3D shit you see nowadays. So he's like, I'm not really sure why. Now, interestingly, if you watch this still like nowadays, and they have this on Shudder as well, like halfway, it's not a long movie. I think it's only 88 minutes. Halfway through the movie, there's like an intermission card, even though, you know, it's very short. And that was because what they used to do, I guess the movies, you know, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess movies used to be on 2 reels, and you'd load up reel 1 and reel 2 in your 2 projectors, like in the theater, and then you could just switch from one to the other without anybody being the wiser. However, a 3D movie, they had to actually have the same film running in both, or, you know, a version of the same film running simultaneously in both the projectors. So when they had the intermission, that's when they had to stop and take both of them out and then put new ones in. So they'd run simultaneously so you could get the 3D effect, because that's how they used to do it. So this movie, basically the story behind it. Vincent Price plays an artist named Professor Henry Jared. Now, at the beginning of the movie, this is actually set, I couldn't tell what year it was. I knew it was like somewhere around the early like 20th century, like turn of the century. I believe it's supposed to be set around 1902. So it's not actually set at the time that the movie came out. Even though I believe the 1933 one, Mystery of the Wax Museum, I think that was set in the 30s. But this one is actually set in 1902. And actually, it's quite cool. I actually really like that kind of dynamic to it. And it almost has some of the like chase sequences, when it gets into kind of the good part of the movie with Vincent Price being the villain, it almost has like a little bit of a Jack the Ripper kind of vibe to it. And I'm pretty sure that was intentional, because I believe it's supposed to have been taking place in New York, at least the way they're talking about like the streets and the locations and stuff. But the way that they built the sets, I mean, it looks like it was all done on a set, but there's nothing wrong with that. It was all done on a set, but it looks like very much like the old cobblestone streets of London, like in the late 1800s when Jack the Ripper was like lurking around. So I do definitely feel like they were trying to go for that kind of vibe, which I quite enjoyed. So Henry Jared, Vincent Price's character, is an artist, and he is a wax sculptor, and he has a small wax museum. And basically his whole thing is he's very much into beauty. So he has all these gorgeous figures of, Marie Antoinette, which is kind of like his magnum opus, I guess. It's this gorgeous, I mean, I will say too, like the wax figures in this, whoever did them, are pretty amazing. I mean, they look really, really good. Like all the costuming and the face and everything, they look really great. So yeah, he has Marie Antoinette, he has Joan of Arc, he has Lincoln and John Wilkes Booth and all this other stuff. But he's very into making them beautiful. Now, he has a business partner named Burke, and Burke is kind of like the money guy. He's not really like, he's not an artistic type of person. So he's basically like, well, look, I invested in this little museum. They get some traffic, but not a lot. And he's like, what we need to do, and I keep telling you this, is we need to put a fucking Chamber of Horrors in here. You need to put like grisly shit. People love that. And Vincent Price, I keep calling him that. I'm just going to call him that. That's what it's fucking... I know it is. I know his character has a name, but I'm just gonna. He's fucking Vincent Price, right? You're just gonna call him Vincent Price. So Vincent Price is like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I want to cater to that kind of people. That's like lowest common denominator kind of shit. My whole thing is like about beauty, and I'm just not willing to do that. And he's like, but he's cool about it, though. He's like, look, if you don't want to be involved, he's like, I have this other guy who is an investor, and he seems like he's kind of more on my wavelength. And he's coming over tonight to have a look around, and maybe he'll buy you out. So Burke's like, okay, that's cool. So this investor comes over, and he seems like very, very interested. He's like, wow, your stuff is amazing. And it's like, yeah, I'd really be interested in like going into this. He's like, but I can't do it right now because I have to go fund this, expedition in Egypt or whatever. But I'll be back in 3 months, and, then we'll talk business, and we'll see what we can do. I can buy your other partner out. So, Vincent Price, very happy about this. He's like, oh, good, I got a new investor. But Burke is not having it. He wants some fucking money, like, right now. And he's mad that Vincent Price won't, concede to his demands of, like, putting some more macabre stuff into the wax museum. So he decides he's gonna, as Tom would say, cross the insurance wires. And he's like, you know what? I'm just gonna burn this fucking place down and, get the insurance money. So he proceeds to do pretty much exactly that. So the first, like, part of the movie, basically, like, after the tour with the other investors and stuff, is just this dude, like, going around setting all the wax figures on fire. And him and Vincent Price are, like, tussling, because obviously Vincent Price, like, this is my life's work, you're ruining it. And, so they're fighting and everything. But he, like, knocks Vincent Price out, Burke does. And then he's like, well, shit, I'll just set you on fire too. More money for me. So that's basically what he does. He just burns the fucking place to the ground. And everybody thinks, I mean, this isn't what happens, but everybody thinks that Vincent Price was also killed in the fire. Now, we jump forward a little while. Like, I don't know if they say, like, how long. It wasn't that long. But it was long enough for the insurance to come in and for Burke to get all the insurance money. I think it was $25,000, which, was nothing to sneeze at back in 1953. Now, what he's thinking about doing with this money, he has this girlfriend who I guess he's kind of like stringing along or whatever. Now, I loved this. The girlfriend at the beginning is this kind of... she has these beautiful, like, blonde curls, and she's very, like, giggly and very feminine, and she seems like she's looking for a sugar daddy type thing. This woman is played by Carolyn Jones, who is best known to millions of people everywhere nowadays as the beautiful Morticia Addams from the original Addams Family show. She's recognizable in this, but it's crazy to see her because this was probably like 10 years before, I think it was about 10 years before the Addams Family show was on. So this might have been her first movie or kind of her first major role. She's not in it a lot because she gets, spoiler alert, because she gets murdered like pretty early on in the movie. But yeah, she's in like several scenes at the beginning, and her face is like immediately recognizable, but it's just so funny to see her with these little blonde curls and like wearing pink, like with a little pink corset, and her like giggling and being all girly and stuff. And I was just like, it was just that amused the shit out of me. But and her voice like sounded, because I don't know, I guess she was putting on like a more femmy kind of voice. So she's trying to get Burke. Burke's like, oh, my poor partner, he died in that fire. What a shame. Boo-hoo. And he's like, yeah, I have all this money. And she's like, oh, that means you can marry me now. And he's just like, oh, look at the time. He's that kind of dude. Now, what ends up happening with that is that Burke goes back to his office or whatever and is getting his ill-gotten gains out of his safe. And then this creepy-ass dude who has this really fucked up looking face, and he has like this black cloak and a big black hat, and he walks all fucked up, like all gimpy and whatever, and he comes in there and essentially like kills Burke and makes it look like a suicide. Like he kind of like knocks him out and then like drags him out into the hall and like hangs him in the elevator, so makes it look like he killed himself. Not too long after this, Carolyn Jones's character, whose name is Kathy Gray, she's gonna go out on a date because she's like, oh, Burke got killed, well, whatever. She's like looking for a new dude now who's gonna, marry her and give her a taste of the high life or whatever. So she's going out with a new guy, and she lives in kind of like a boarding house, and her roommate is a woman named Sue Allen. So she goes out on a date, and then they say that the girls are kind of having problems. Like, Sue is kind of unemployed and she's looking for a job. She goes to a job interview, she doesn't get the job. And so, like, the person that runs the boarding house is like, look, bitches, you got to give us some money or we're going to kick your ass out. And she's just like, oh, no, please, maybe Kathy, when she goes on the date, maybe she'll be able to, like, talk some money out of this new dude that she's seeing or whatever. However, that is not how shit goes down. It turns out that Kathy Gray was murdered by the same fucked up looking dude who hanged Burke, the business partner. Now, this is an old ass movie. It's 1953, and it's a remake from an even older ass movie from 1933. So I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say, and even if you're watching it today, because this movie is almost 70 years old. And so obviously you're going to know that this fucked up looking dude that's running around is obviously Vincent Price because, he was in a fire and whatnot. But they kind of try to throw you for a loop a little bit because what ends up happening is that you see Vincent Price later and he's looking all suave and normal. Now, he's in a wheelchair and he can't really walk all that well, and his hands are all fucked up. So he's like, okay, well, I got all these new investors. I'm going to open another wax museum, another waxworks, and I guess I'm gonna give the public what they want. They want all this horror shit. Well, I'm gonna put all this horror shit in there. So he basically opens up this big huge place, like I think it's on Broadway or something, and it has like all this real gruesome shit. Like it has like fucking Charlotte Corday like stabbing Marat. It has Joan of Arc being burned alive. It has Anne Boleyn getting beheaded. It has all that kind of fun shit in there, and it's interesting too, because this is something that I kind of noticed when I was watching the movie. I was like, the theme of this movie being sort of like, I don't know if it's like the theme, but it's kind of a through line that runs throughout the plot is like art versus commerce, right? So Vincent Price being an artist at the beginning, and he's like, I won't lower myself to do all this horror stuff because I don't want to do that. I'm more into beauty. I want people to come here and see beautiful things rather than seeing grotesque things. So he doesn't want to do that. So, but after he, is in the fire and is disfigured and his hands are all fucked up and he can't work anymore, like, so now he has to employ other sculptors like henchmen to help him out because he's not able to do it. He's kind of, not surprisingly become hardened. So it's interesting that, he's nice guy, and then, it kind of leads up to that. And then you have the intermission, and then after the intermission, it's almost like the movie kind of goes into, because he's like, oh, well, I'm going to be like this fucking carnival barker type of person, which he didn't want to be before, because that's apparently what the public wants, because now he's all fucking cynical and everything. So after the intermission, the first thing you see is like this carnival barker type dude outside of the new House of Wax with one of those paddle ball things. Actually, he's got two of them, and it's like 3D, like coming at you. So it's funny how after the intermission, like after he has come back with this new, more public friendly, I guess, or more grotesque House of Wax, then it's almost like the 3D in it gets purposely more vaudevillian, I guess, or like more in your face. So you have like this big long scene of this guy with these paddle balls just like doing them like right in your face, and he even makes jokes about like he's gonna knock somebody's popcorn out of their hand, you know what I mean? So it's like, like coming at you like if you were sitting in the theater when you were seeing this. And then there's a scene later where just for no reason at all, the guy, like Sue's boyfriend, like takes her to this can show. So there's like a really long sequence of all these can girls like kicking their legs like toward the camera and like sticking their roughly butts in the camera and stuff like that. So it's just like really, really funny that they kind of did that. And like I said, the movie, it didn't really necessarily have to be in 3D, and that really the paddleball scene and the can girl scene are the only scenes that are like very, very deliberately, hey, there's stuff coming at you because it's 3D, you know what I mean? The rest of it didn't really have to be in 3D, but as I mentioned, I never got to see it in 3D, but people that I watched on YouTube that have seen it in 3D said it actually looked really beautiful, not just because stuff was coming in your face, but just because the depth of field, and you could see like all the the wax figures and the way the set design and everything like that, because the set design, the production design in this is really, really nice. And I'm pretty sure, like I said, it was all constructed on sound stages, like the entire wax museum and like the thing in the back, like the factory where he makes the figures and all that. So he opens this brand new wax museum with all this horrific shit in it, and obviously the public's like eating it up. Now, Sue, who is pretty traumatized still by the death of her best friend, Kathy, aka Morticia, and so she's, and she's the one that found the body, and she also saw the dude, saw the deformed guy like running around in the street, and he chased her. So obviously he was going to kill her as well, but she was able to evade him. So she goes to this wax museum like opening because her boyfriend is also a sculptor, and he's kind of looking to, get in there and like help the dude out with his work, because as I said, Vincent Price's character, his hands were all fucked up in the fire, and he can't sculpt anymore, so he needs, helpers to help him out doing it. So she goes there, and one of the things that she notices is that the figure of Joan of Arc that is in this house of wax looks suspiciously like her best friend, Kathy Gray. And so she's kind of up there looking like, man, that is really... That's unsettling. So she's kind of like really upset about it. And of course, like all the dudes around her are like, oh, you're silly. It's like, yeah, it kind of looks like her, but it's no big or whatever. And, why are you getting all hysterical and that kind of thing? Like, no one really believes her, obviously. So Vincent Price like rolls over in his wheelchair, and he says to her, it's like, oh, I'm really sorry I upset you. It's like, yes, it does look like her, but that's because I saw her picture in the paper like after she got murdered, and I thought she had a beautiful face, and so I used her face like as a model. Now, Sue is kind of like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. But then she starts thinking about like other little details, and she's like, yeah, but how would he have known about like her? She had like one ear pierced, and how would she have known like all these other little details about her that she can see, in the wax figure, like just from a picture in the newspaper? So she's really not buying it, but she tries to kind of like report things to the cops and everything like that. But again, they're just like, you're just a woman. You don't know how anything works. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. Like I think there's even a line in there where, she's really not letting it go. This is her best friend. Her best friend got murdered. She found the girl, and the murderer chased her through the streets as well. So she's not letting this go, understandably. But every time she goes to the cops, everyone's just kind of like, that's just like a skirt to make up something. I think that's even a line in there. It's just like a skirt, like to make up something crazy like that or whatever. So again, this is not really a spoiler, because anybody that has seen any horror movie in the last 60, 70 years will know that the reason that a lot of these wax figures look so much like real people is because they are indeed real people. And honestly, like even before they do the scene where Sue goes into the wax museum and sees the Joan of Arc that looks just like her friend, then there's a scene where the like fucked up looking dude goes into the morgue and steals her body. So you obviously know that there's something nefarious going on. So there's grave robbing, there's all this other kind of stuff. Another fun fact, he actually, Vincent Price's character actually has two helpers, one of whom is played, he's named Igor, because of course he is, and he's a deaf mute, and he's actually played by Charles Bronson, which I think he was credited under his real name, which I think is Charles Baczynski, but it's definitely him. It's weird because when you see him at first, you're kind of like, I was kind of like, that's Charles Bronson, isn't it? And then I was like, oh, maybe not. But then like a couple of angles, I'm like, oh, that's definitely Charles Bronson. And then when I looked it up later, it definitely is Charles Bronson. So I don't know if this was his first movie, but he doesn't have any speaking lines, obviously, because he's mute. But he's definitely in this, and he's kind of like the muscle, you know what I mean? So, as I said, it will surprise no one to know that what's been going on is that Vincent Price, the normal-looking, nice Vincent Price, who's in the wheelchair, and only his hands are kind of fucked up, is obviously the same person as the fucked-up-looking dude, because there's a very, very famous scene at the end where Sue is, he's trying to get Sue because he's like, oh, your face looks just like what I wanted for my new Marie Antoinette, which, like I said, his old Marie Antoinette, which got burned alive, burned alive. She's a wax figure, but got burned up like at the beginning of the movie. That was like his great life's work, and so he's been looking for another model to make another one, and it's going to be like even better than before. So Sue obviously has this perfect Marie Antoinette face, so he's just like itching to get his little like fucked up hands on her so he can throw her in the in the vat of wax, cover up with wax, and like do all this other stuff. So so that's essentially what happens. Like, so there's kind of like a everybody not believing her, even though she's pretty sure that some of these wax figures are real bodies. I think it's basically led to believe that they all are, because he says, well, I can't sculpt anymore. But his cover story is, oh, my helpers help me by sculpting them. I just tell them what to do. But what he's actually doing is taking bodies of people he doesn't like and covering them with wax so they're like super, super lifelike, because it's easier for him. He's built like this whole elaborate thing with, like I said, a big fucking thing of boiling wax and all this other kind of shit. And so he's just like pouring wax over them and just kind of like dressing them up and whatnot, and then displaying them in the wax museum, and no one being the wiser. So that's essentially what the movie is. This is, I mean, for the 1950s, it's weird because I kind of feel like a lot of, especially in the United States, a lot of movies that came out in the 50s were more kind of like sci-fi, just a big bug, alien type movies. This one is almost kind of like a throwback, which I guess isn't surprising since it was a remake of a movie from the 30s. So it's much more like a gothic thriller type of thing. And I think like even at the time, some of the reviews of it were kind of like not that great, because they're saying, oh, this is like such a, it's like, it's such an old type movie. Like they don't, we don't make this kind of stuff anymore, which is funny to think about, like from the 1950s. But yeah, a lot of people weren't really into it. But over the ensuing decades, I think this has really kind of risen through the ranks to become a horror classic. It's a beautiful looking movie. Like, it's shot beautifully. Vincent Price is just so great in it. He's actually, compared to some of his later villain roles, he's pretty subdued, because like I said, I'm pretty sure this was his first villainous type of role. And he's essentially playing two character. I mean, it's the same guy, but he's essentially playing two characters, because his fucked up looking face, that's his real face, because he actually was disfigured in the fire, but he has essentially built a wax face that looked like his old face, and it's good enough that nobody sees, because like I said, there's that famous scene where Sue is pounding on it and all the wax falls off and like all the fucked up, and the makeup on the on his disfigured, that looks like really, really good. One of the stories that I've heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but one of the stories that I've heard is that when he was in that makeup, everybody else that was working on the movie, like, he wasn't allowed to like come into the cafeteria or the commissary or whatever, like to eat with the rest of them, because everybody was like so grossed out by what the makeup looked like, and it was like so upsetting that it was like making them like turn in their stomach or whatever. Like I said, I don't know, like maybe people were more sensitive back then or whatever. It's just makeup, but the makeup in this still looks really, really good. You have to think this is like 1953, man. They didn't have no CGI, no nothing, and it looks really, really good. Like, he looks pretty grody, and it just looks like a really, really good makeup job. Now, I will say that the remake, as I said, that they made in 2005, that famously had Paris Hilton getting killed with a spike through her head or whatever, is a pretty okay movie, and I like that they had, there's a lot of gore in it, and most of it's practical. The CGI in it isn't good, but there's not a lot of CGI, but they introduced a lot of elements that weren't in this one. In a sense, like I said, they made it more like a teen slasher type of thing. They made the killers like twins instead of just one guy who was covering up his face. And they just kind of introduced some other elements that weren't there. Like I said, the remake, it's still kind of a remake of House of Wax, but it reminded me a lot more of Tourist Trap or maybe Waxwork, more than House of Wax, but it's still like a pretty decent movie for that era. I'm not a big fan of all the kind of remakes that they made, like all the slasher remakes that they made in the early 2000s. I don't know, but that was actually kind of one of the better ones. But honestly, if you're gonna watch House of Wax, the 1933 one is actually totally worth watching too. It's pretty decent, but I mean, you can't beat fucking the beautiful Technicolor 3D Vincent Price making these beautiful wax figures, and it just looks so good, and it really, really holds up to this day still. And so honestly, you can't really go wrong with Vincent Price. Every single thing I've seen him in, he was amazing. He was just an amazing dude, and anything that he's in is worth watching, and this is definitely one of his best movies. And I know that's like a long list, but this is definitely one of his best movies. I love shit about wax museums. I love all that kind of stuff. As I said, nowadays, nothing in it's going to surprise you. Like back then, maybe it was like a big shock that, oh, the deformed guy and the Vincent Price in the wheelchair, oh my God, it's the same dude. But, or oh my God, he's really like using bodies to make wax figures out of. Nowadays, that's not going to surprise anybody, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that, you see the twist coming, what's happening. It's just, it's nice enough to just like sit back and enjoy like the beautiful set design and like the acting and everything. It's just a fun movie. And if you can watch it in 3D, because like I said, I watched it on Shudder, so obviously you can't watch it on 3D on there, but I believe that there is a Blu-ray that is 3D, and the 3D on it apparently looks really good. So if you can get hold of that, or if you've seen it in 3D, let me know what it looks like, because I've heard it looks like really, really good, and I'd be interested to see it in all its 3D glory. It's good without that, but now I'm kind of like interested to see it. But yeah, I mean, House of Wax, it's a fucking classic. If you haven't seen it, definitely go to Shudder or Amazon Prime and watch it, or get the Blu-ray and watch it in 3D and tell me what you thought about it. And that'll do it for this movie retrospective. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.